Hey everyone, today I'm interviewing Brian Rankin. Brian is a professional photographer living in Toronto, Canada. He currently works as a photographer for Holt Renfrew, and his work was recently featured in an editorial for Yoko Mag entitled Tangled Up in Blue. He grew up in a small town in Ontario, and he spent his summers out east in an even smaller town. He moved to Toronto when he was 18 to pursue a degree in English at the University of Toronto, and somehow found his way into professional photography through this, which we get to talk about today. When he's not doing his cool photography work, he's playing guitar in a punk band or riding his bike without a helmet. Today we sit down and talk about his personal experiences with food, how his upbringing sort of shaped his art and his cooking, and what it's like to be a photographer during the rise of social media food photos. Welcome, Brian.
Hi, everyone.
So where did you come from? So you said that you grew up in a small town. How small is...
St. Catharines in Ontario, in Canada, for those of you not here.
International.
Yeah, it's like 100 and something thousand people. And then my dad was from the East Coast in Nova Scotia. And so when I was a kid, we'd spend our summers there, which is a town of 30, I think, 40 maybe.
Like 30 people?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. My dad ran for mayor, and there was 35 votes cast in the mayoral election. So, yeah.
So tight race.
Yeah. Tiny. Yeah.
Thanks. Nice. All right. So I wanted to get started with who you are. Give us a little bit of background about what you do and what sorts of influences that you had.
So I'm a photographer, and for fun, I'm a musician. I kind of came into it backwards. I went to university for English Lit, and while working at an advertising agency, saw an invoice for a photographer and kind of didn't realize you could make money. And so I quit the internship and started cold calling photographers to get advice. And then through that started being a photo assistant and then ended up as a photographer. But I'd always been interested in it. And I'd went to a high school that was really heavily focused on arts, and didn't come from an artistic family, but immediate family at least. But then the broader sense in our family was very artistic and artistically minded, and that's kind of an influence, and had a bunch of cool relatives that turned me on to music and photography and skateboarding and whatever else. So yeah.
Cool. So let's talk a little bit about your family, because you mentioned that they're very cool.
Yeah.
But you're a Rankin. So what does being a Rankin mean?
I guess it depends on what part of the country you're from. For people from the East Coast, it is sort of this weird musical dynasty thing. My dad's hometown had them and a bunch of other famous Celtic musicians. So within that world, it's sort of like having the Beatles and the Rolling Stones and Led Zeppelin all be next door neighbors, and your cousin's prom dates and whatever else, right? Like it just kind of, it's so part of the culture that is the culture essentially, like Celtic music, and the Scottish culture is sort of inextricably tied to everything that goes on there. So being Rankin, they're my dad's cousins, I guess, second cousins or something, but it was like very well known that we were Rankins. And then growing up, it was like, wasn't so obvious because not everyone's a Celtic music fan in Ontario, but
Surprise.
Yeah, surprise. But the people that knew thought all of a sudden that you were going to have this like musical talent burst forward.
Oh yeah. I was surprised.
Touch the guitar. Yeah. It's like, it's a thing. And so that kind of means that you're expected to be excellent at whatever musical or artistic endeavor. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, I remember when I first met you, because I grew up Irish dancing. So as soon as I heard that you were Rankin, I was freaking out, because that was the music that I grew up with.
Yeah,
so
for sure.
It was very let down.
Yeah.
I wasn't actually. It's fine. So did you draw at all from that identity growing up as a Rankin, like in terms of your music or your creativity, or did you kind of forge your own path? I
kind of did the opposite. Whenever someone would be like, "Oh, you're a Rankin, like, do you want to play this like acoustic song?" I was like, "No." Can I swear? Can we swear? Should we
whatever. It's
I was like, that I'm gonna go listen to this Black Flag album, or like I'm gonna go like break something, be angry, and it took me a while to appreciate what that music meant to people, because it was so expected that you fall into line with that it was kind of like, no, this.
Yeah.
I'm doing this other thing. And whether or not that was like an explicit rejection of that was I still don't really know whether I was like doing it on purpose or it was just like what I was drawn to naturally. But
Yeah.
I didn't really appreciate the Rankin identity. Because there's also different, you know, parts of that. There's like being from a farming, having your dad be from a farming community and like so focused on like trades and sort of like hard labor for work. And then being a person who wants to do art for a living, that's also a rejection of some sort of family identity. So definitely. That was also, there's like a bunch of different layers to that.
That's fair.
That idea. Yeah.
Yeah, very true. And especially growing up in a small town, you either go with the grain or against the grain. There's no like in between with that, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Fair. So your father grew up, or he was on a farm?
Farmer.
Okay.
Grew up he was one of 15 kids.
Wow.
And the community when he was born was almost in completely kind of like farmers and people involved in agriculture. And then as that industry sort of waned, his family was the last remaining thing. So he, like his entire life up until he moved to Ontario, was farming. And then he became a butcher and owned a butcher shop. But it was all kind of like agriculturally like, and before it was a thing, very farm to table. Like he would butcher the meat that he grew, and sort of because that was a necessity, like that's what you did. But
not really a thought.
Yeah, like nowadays it would be seen as this very like artisanal like craft thing, but it was just like making
craft meat.
Exactly, yeah. It was just like making a living for him. So
fair.
I grew up with that as a food identity. Like he didn't understand why someone would, you know, buy some like sketchy sausage from a No Frills, you know, like some weird like gypsy meat or something, you know, like it just like didn't make sense to him.
Yeah, if you can have the good stuff and it's easy to access, then why would you?
And not understanding processed foods and like that kind of thing. So that was a very strong.
Yeah, so you took a lot from that.
Yeah.
Did you find like when you moved out eventually and were on your own and like cooking for the first time, did you find you were going towards those like dollar sausages at No Frills or?
Well, I was never really allowed to have like really sugary, like processed cereals and stuff. So when I moved to residence, it was like there's an endless supply of Fruit Loops.
True.
And it's like,
it's dangerous.
Oh my God, there's like I'm having sugar in mass quantities for the first time. I'm having like hot dogs and weird processed burgers, and it was like the novelty of it. But as soon as I left that, and it was like, oh my God, I feel crappy all the time and like tired and like lethargic because of this food. Yeah, I mean, I try and cook as consciously as I can and focus on locally sourced things and in season things and, you know, things that are very in vogue right now. But
fair. But we're always kind of.
But for a reason, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, and I find that's also. I mean, they're in vogue, but it sounds like that came from your past as well. So
yeah,
it's not
for sure.
Yeah.
The idea of paying for vegetables is still really foreign to me. Like in the summer, we had so many things in the garden that it didn't make, like we never paid for, you know, the idea of like buying a bag of potatoes is like really strange. Yeah. Things in paper bags is bizarre.
Yeah. I can see that for sure. So moving more towards kind of the creative process around food.
Yeah.
When you think of foods or cuisines that you're really drawn to, or that you feel really connected to, what sorts of influences do you pull from?
I don't really know why, but for some reason I really love like Southern US cooking.
Oh, okay.
Fried chicken and
waffles,
collard greens and waffles and catfish and stuff like that. And I have no idea why. Yeah, all kinds of stuff like that. And again, like being a white guy from Canada, it sort of seems like disingenuous, but that was always what I was drawn to. That and just things that are less presumptuous. Like you and I were talking about like how I don't really think things through. I sort of throw things together. And so the idea of like Italian cooking where you can take, you know, 4 ingredients and that's the dish, as opposed to, you know, making some like sort of like souffle or something, like those types of cuisines that are like typically people that were more impoverished, less ingredients, less like making something out of nothing. Those cuisines typically seem to appeal to me just because that's what I like cooking too.
Yeah. Definitely.
And I don't know. I don't know why that is, or I mean, it's hard to turn down fried chicken. You know?
Sure.
It's not exactly like a questionable thing to be into, but
no. But it's interesting that you pull so much. Like, did you ever go down there?
No, but well, actually a little bit when I was younger, but I don't think that would ever. I don't remember like that being an influence or anything. But a family friend is from New Orleans, and whenever he would visit, he would just like cook these things. Like he would cook like jambalaya or like a gumbo,
nice,
or like the fried catfish or all these things that are kind of stereotypically Southern American or Southern U.S.
Southern U.S.
Southern U.S. Southern U.S. And so I remember those things and just being like, oh my God, like food can have spice in it, or,
True.
you know, there's other things besides meatloaf in the world. It's like really eye opening. I remember being like 12 or 13 and eating this food and just thinking he was really cool and associating all this, like this cool guy with this food. And that was kind of an eye opening thing. And I think we just hit our aha moment by accident during this podcast. Yeah.
It's like the Oprah version.
Yeah. For sure.
Yeah. The food version of Oprah.
Yeah.
Nothing against Oprah. Just
shout out Oprah.
Yeah. She's never going to listen to this.
Not with that attitude.
True. All right. So then I wanted to talk a little bit about the connection, or do you find there's a connection between food and music for you, or not so much?
Yeah. And I don't really know why, but I feel like there is. I think the same kind of people that would be drawn to, you know, playing music would be also drawn to the cooking lifestyle. It's a lot of like, you know, lawless, vagrant people that end up in both professions. And I think you're seeing it a lot with like current celebrity chef culture. I mean, you know, Maddie Matheson was the merch guy for Alexis on Fire. Chuck Hughes used to cater Warp Tour. Like Action Bronson is inexplicably a food star. You know, Guy Fieri was a roadie, I heard. Like all these things. Like it's just a very interesting mix of people. Like Anthony Bourdain has always been a huge, you know, like supporter of punk, and talked about how he, you know, used to feed the guys from New Order and all this stuff. Like for whatever reason, there's a lot of crossover. And so I think the same type of people associate with both. And I think that while the two, you know, things are not necessarily the same in the job, I guess the same type of people are drawn to both of them. So you have these kind of crossover people that are in both cultures. And so you see that. And I think from my understanding, there's a lot of food items that came from cultures that were, you know, focused on music and stuff. Again, like the Southern U.S. thing, like chicken and waffles being this like blues musician food, or all these other dishes that were associated with like being up late at night, like, you know, jerk being the food that they would have, like jerk chicken, I mean, being the food that they would have at like dance halls in Jamaica and stuff. Like all these kind of things that just like got associated with all these cultural things, and music is obviously tied
central to that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
For sure. And I kind of want to go back because you're talking about a lot of celebrity examples, and it seems that they kind of all fit within not necessarily like the most mainstream of music venues or music directions. Yeah. So do you think there's kind of like more of a punk element to that connection, or?
Yeah, because I mean, I've never worked in kitchens in any real way, but it seemed like from, you know, you read like a Kitchen Confidential or like whatever.
Yeah.
And the types of people that are described in these things are the same type of people that you associate with this like punk movement, like making it yourself and doing things that aren't traditional, and like not going to some sort of formal schooling and just like making things work. And I think especially in Toronto, there's a strong sense of like the restaurant culture here is focused less on this like high culture, very like, you know, artistic restaurants, and more on like, oh, we're going to cook on an electric stove in the back of someone's house, and like we're going to cook sweetbreads and like you if you don't like it kind of thing. Like, and so a lot of restaurants like that, like the Black Hoof is a good example of that. And that was like a really strong thing for them, was like forging this own path. And the same thing with the punk scene. You know, it's like no one told the Ramones that they should get a record contract, or like, you know, there was no reason for that whole movement to exist besides like sheer force of will. Yeah. And I think a lot of like, you have to have that same attitude in food culture, it seems like. I think there is that same sort of crossover attitude.
Like a scrappiness almost.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Literally and metaphorically.
Exactly, yeah. Like turning something that shouldn't exist into something that's a cultural movement.
Yeah.
Exists very much in both those things, I think.
Yeah, definitely. I could see that for sure. So when you're in studio, or like when you're really kind of gearing up for musical sorts of situations, I said that in a weird way, but you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So when you're playing music quite often,
Yeah.
do you find that what you're cooking is shifting, or is it kind of like you eat generally the same no matter what?
No, I definitely, like the band Roach Lord, we often, like before we play shows, shout out Roach Lord, plug it for the world. I find that when we're playing shows or like we're recording or we're in like we gravitate towards these like street food things because they're quick, and there's a reason why they became foods that were sold out of carts or whatever. Like the amount of falafels we've eaten before shows, or like pizza or whatever, it tends to be these kind of like calorie dense things in bread kind of.
Yeah.
And so for whatever reason, whether I'm cooking it or not, it tends to be these sort of like, again, like like I'm making air quotes with my hands,
yeah.
peasant foods or whatever. That tends to be what they are. So like things that were cheap ingredients and can get thrown together in someone's like weird food truck are, for whatever reason, tend to be what we're eating. And they're cheap, because
that's a big part too.
When you're either making very little or none money playing a show, you don't want to be spending $45 on like
gourmet meals,
ossobuco or whatever. Like, who gives a shit? Yeah.
Fair. So how about when you're not like, super busy with music? What sorts of foods do you get? I guess, do you cook Southern food a lot, or do you kind of?
Well, I try to. Don't have cooking foods that are deep fried at home is like the most scary shit ever. Oil will kill you,
Yeah, absolutely.
Ain't no fun having a vat of peanut oil somewhere. No good. But I try to, and I try to stick to simple things when I'm cooking at home. I live by myself. I don't have roommates or like a partner or anything. So cooking becomes this sort of like begrudging necessary evil kind of thing. Even though I love to cook and I love food, it's like
you're by yourself.
Yeah. So it's like, it's just a utility thing. So I cook things that are like nutritionally dense or whatever and can be cooked quick. And I find that when I'm focusing specifically on like, if I'm working on a lot of photography projects or a lot of music projects, then like that occupies so much of my brain that like the food thing, like while you want to be healthy and eat good food, it ends up being like a very push to the sidelines kind of thing.
Absolutely.
And so that can be sometimes.
Yeah. I feel like that's Toronto too, eh? Like there's just like that culture of busy in Toronto where we live.
Yeah, exactly.
Where
it's
kind of, I came from Peterborough, which was not as, like at the time there were not a lot of restaurants. I mean, there were great restaurants, but not as much as in Toronto. So you just cook at home. And then the second I moved here, all of a sudden like Uber Eats was here and everything was just at your touch.
Yeah. I mean, and I think, again, like specific cultures have been focused so long on these sort of utility cheap food items that are now here. Like you can't make a meal for $5, but you can go get like a falafel or like a banh mi or like whatever, a giant bowl of pho for $5. And it's like that kind of thing is really hard to produce at home and in any like small quantity or whatever. And I think Toronto, being this city full of other cultures, facilitates a lot of that cheap food and that sort of street food mentality. Less so than I think like if you were in Bangkok or like Singapore or something, but more so than, Judic, Nova Scotia could ever
Donaires.
Yeah. Oh my God.
Ugh, the sweet donaires.
No, thank you. Yeah. I didn't live there long enough to get a taste for that gross yogurt sauce, but
it's really sweet, right?
Yeah. Yeah. It's like, it tastes almost like it's got like corn syrup in it or something.
Probably does.
I think it's like yogurt and corn syrup and like some mint and stuff. Yeah.
Just the extra dash of sugar.
Yeah, it's weird because like that's such a bastardized version of like this food, but it's like gone through this lens of like, how do we serve an ethnic food to white people?
Yeah.
And have it be palatable to someone whose idea of a gourmet meal is like the biggest steak they can find and like 15 potatoes. Like You know, how do we translate all these? And that's another thing about Canada is like when you go outside of the big cities where it's like these actual people that are from these countries serving you their food, it ends up getting kind of distorted through this lens of like, how can we Canadianize everything? You know, like I've had maple General Tao chicken, which is like not Canadian or Chinese or anything. It's just this like weird
like in limbo food.
Yeah. And I think Canada is kind of, I don't know, I've never lived anywhere else long enough to know if that's a Canadian thing, but in my mind that's what we're notorious for, is like adding a maple flavor to something.
Yeah. Or pineapple.
Yeah.
For whatever reason. The Hawaiian pizzas.
I love pineapple pizza.
Brian.
I know.
Oh.
I know. I don't, it just works, you know? Savory and sweet, and it's like salted caramel or like a chocolate covered pretzel or
yeah, true.
You know, balance.
Okay, that's fair.
Yeah.
That's fair.
I mean, I understand why if you were an Italian that would make your no want to cry. But
probably.
Like,
yeah.
You know.
But
yin and yang.
Sure.
Yeah.
All right. So moving away from Hawaiian pizzas, let's talk a little bit about you as a photographer and more specifically, do you find, do you have any connection between your photography and food, or is that kind of in another box for you?
Well, in a very practical sense, so I work in commercial photography. Like I'm not doing like fine art for galleries or anything. So it's produced with a client in mind and whatever. And so most of these sets, you're trying to get things done as efficiently as possible. And everyone leaving for coffee or lunch or whatever is like a hindrance to this, you know, machine that is working.
Right.
So as a utility thing, most shoots you're doing are catered, and you're focusing on like getting people, like getting them to slam down as many greens as they can during lunch so that they're not falling asleep during the shoot later.
Yeah.
And, you know, things like that. It's like coffee and nutritionally dense, like, but still good food. And so there isn't, I don't see it as like a, you know, I'm not looking at food the way I'm looking at me producing photography, but they are tied in this like practical sense.
Yeah, that you need to eat.
Exactly. Yeah. And so
that very biological element.
And so if you're working on a shoot that's many days, like everyone's like, oh, we had pizza yesterday for craft services. Like, why can't we have falafel, or like, why can't we have this like thing? And it's like a weirdly practical sense. And people are trying to like, you're trying to please everyone, and you're trying to optically, you're trying to make it look good for the client, that you're not a cheapskate, and you're like,
not just buying like cinnamon buns
exactly,
and leaving them out.
Exactly. Yeah. So there's like that weird connection. And I think that's something that food has unique to it, is that because everyone has to eat, unless you're like one of those weirdos that's doing like a Soylent Soylent diet, you have to eat. And whether or not you're ingesting like, I don't know, like a bunch of fruit roll-ups in the morning or like an actual breakfast, you're having to eat. And so it sort of ties into everything you do, I think.
Absolutely. Yeah.
You know, whether or not you want it to or not.
Yeah.
It does. Yeah.
Whether or not you think about it too.
Exactly. Yeah.
That's, for me, I find it really hard because I study food. So I always think about, you know, how it impacts people in every single point. So I see it in ways, obviously.
Yeah. Well, it's weird. Like, I was thinking about Nova Scotia as being obviously influenced by Scotland. And so you think about the ability to grow food there in Scotland and then Nova Scotia, and it's the very similar climates and very similar like topography and geography and everything. And so the way the culture worked was focused less on food and more on alcohol, because it was easier to grow barley to make beer and scotch and whatever than it was to like grow actual vegetables or have meat besides sheep or whatever. And so the cultural aspect of that came back to food because that's what they had to do. So if you can only grow scotch, and your culture starts focusing on the only thing you have available to you. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
You know, get drunk and sing.
When in doubt.
Yeah, exactly.
True. And especially like if you're moving from Scotland to Canada and you don't really have that, you know, at that point, you didn't really know what you were in for in Canada.
No. And I think they landed there and it was like, oh, this looks like home.
Yeah. Fair.
Here we are. And then
just went around.
And the culture repeated because it was able to.
That's a really good point too. Yeah. Even with the landscape, it just kind of like
Yeah, and
give them that
so
space.
that's why I think the Scottish culture is stuck around, attached to this idea of like food and alcohol and culture and music and whatever, because it's able to be facilitated.
True. Sorry, that's me shaking my head vigorously in agreement.
And I'm knocking the mics.
So I wanted to talk to you about the whole, I guess in social media, the whole picture before a meal phenomenon.
Oh.
How do you feel about that, Brian?
Friggin' hate it. Can't stand it.
Yeah.
I think I've taken... I got an iPhone in December, and I think I've taken 20 pictures on it. So it's May now. So I don't know.
Bravo.
3 a month, 4 a month, maybe.
Yeah.
Hate it. Can't stand it. Hate being at a restaurant, seeing a bunch of people taking pictures. Maybe it's because I'm annoyed by the quality of the photo.
I was going to ask you.
Yeah. Until iPhones are the same as a actual, and also, you know, restaurants are not designed for photography. They're designed to look good. And so I find food looks really crap under restaurant lighting. Typically, if it's a fancy restaurant, the food looks weird. It's candles and it's all, it's bizarre.
Modeled.
Yeah. And so I don't know. I also find, the whole culture of that, just like eat the damn food, you know, I don't know, maybe. And I guess that's everyone's prerogative, but applies to music too. Put your damn phone out when you're seeing a concert, you know?
Oh yeah.
No one wants to see your Lana Del Rey vertical video. Chelsea, Miranda,
Bethany.
Yeah, we're calling you out.
Yeah,
I don't know. That kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I think that photo, like when you were a cook or a chef, your food used to be judged on that single, like you'd eat it, and if it was good, you'd recommend it to somebody. Now everyone thinks that they're a restaurant critic, or like they're writing for the James Beard Foundation, and
but
like,
actually just Yelp.
Yeah, exactly. Like Yelp is it brings out the worst in humanity.
Truly.
Yeah, truly. And I think that giving people this is gonna get really hostile. I'm getting really hostile here. I think Yelp gives people that shouldn't have an expert opinion on anything a voice, and that's bizarre to me.
Yeah.
You know. Oh man, I sound like all those old photographers I used to work for that complained about digital cameras being the end of times. But
yeah,
here we are. Yeah, I don't know. I just think you should eat your food.
Yep.
And, you know, people also have this expectation now where it's, you know, you see like some Narcity video on Facebook, and it's like Toronto's best waffles. It's like, what if they're not Toronto's best? You know, nothing has. You don't.
Toronto's
have to have,
most photogenic waffles.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be Toronto's best waffles. Like,
yeah,
not everything you eat has to be this like mind blowing transcendental experience. You know, it can just be like sustenance and taste okay.
Yeah,
yeah, like,
just to get by.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be like. And I guess that's to do with the expectation now of these pictures, and like, if it's not Instagrammable, then like what's the point of going to brunch? You know, it's like, if not to do that, then why?
Never for food.
Yeah.
Never to eat it.
And that's just, I think that's really frustrating to me.
Yeah.
It's like someone put their time and effort into making this food, and someone served it to you, and like, you know, there was thought behind it typically and whatever. And then you're like, oh, but it doesn't look good. There's not enough whipped cream and like, you know, there's no sparklers in it or whatever. It's like, food shouldn't have to be photogenic.
True. But I think you kind of touched on it a couple minutes ago when you were talking about
the beginning of the rant.
When it was still... so at the beginning of the rant, you kind of touched on how, you know, a chef would plate the food, and then it would come to your table and you would just eat it, or you would like have that brief glimpse of what the food looks like, and that was part of an experience or like a memory.
Yeah.
So to me, it's kind of, you know, that memory is no longer there because you always have it. So it doesn't become a memory so much as like on your phone, ready to access. Yeah,
it's the same. Yeah, and I think you're taking this thing that's meant and designed to be a temporary, fleeting moment, and trying to oddly immortalize it or put it on this pedestal or something. And, you know, there's a lot of restaurants that do focus on theatrical presentation, and that's a part of it. But again, like, that's meant to be a momentary thing too. Like, if you film a video of the smoking moss cocktail at that place in New York or whatever it's called, and like that no longer is a fleeting moment of this like magic. You're just sort of like picking apart at all the pieces of it. And I think that's not what these things are designed to,
Yeah.
or how they're designed to be appreciated. You know, like, it's like, to me, it's kind of like taking a picture of the Mona Lisa.
Yeah.
It's like, just go see the Mona Lisa, you know, like
Yeah.
remember seeing the Mona Lisa. You don't need to take a picture. You don't need to like selfie yourself beside Starry Night. Like it is its own thing.
Yeah.
And I'm not equating, you know, a plate of braised short rib to Starry Night, but like,
Oh, it could be.
yeah,
You know?
it might be the Starry Night of short ribs. Who knows?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's interesting too, as a photographer, that you are pushing for that in the moment when your job is to capture.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, it's funny. I think about that often, actually. But I've always been really against sort of life documentation, and I don't really think that everyone has to feel that way, but I often feel like, and I think it could be perhaps because I'm so focused on getting this technically perfect photograph that I get out of this moment. Whereas some people can just like flick their iPhone out and take a picture and then put it back, and that's enough, and that's as much as they thought about it. But if I have a camera in my hands, it's like I tend to be more mindful or less mindful, I guess. I'm focused on like, oh, are those clouds getting enough definition because of the exposure I've chosen? Like dumb stuff like that. So for me, taking photos and stuff takes me out of a moment, whereas I think some people are trying to capture a moment. So I think I've always felt this kind of counterintuitive aspect to it that way.
That's really interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think the same thing with food. Like if I'm focusing on taking a food photo and I'm like, oh, I don't know, like, does this like cookie look good enough? It's like, I'd rather just be eating the thing as opposed to like, because I can't help it.
If Brian's staring at a cookie, it's already gone.
Yeah, it's done. It's in my mouth. It's gone. Yeah.
Fair.
And I think that's partially due to that whole thing. It's like, I'm mindful about, you know,
That's fair.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to call you out because you do a lot of Instagram stories.
Oh, yeah.
With food.
Yeah.
So what sorts of motivations go into that?
It started off as me kind of mocking the Stand and Stir TV show, you know, like the Rachel Rays or whatever. And for better or worse, my narcissistic tendencies came out, and people were like, this is funny. And I was kind of like, oh, this is, you know, it feels good to have someone good. It feels good to get a laugh, you know? Instagram is the easiest crowd to please because only people that think you're funny are going to engage with it.
That's true.
And so I don't know. Yeah. I also have I enjoy teaching people about things. And I felt like if I could, you know, teach someone to make beef bourguignon through some stupid Instagram story, then, you know, like, and, yeah, I also, like, again, like when I'm focusing on a video or like an Instagram story, I tend to be more focused on cooking the food as well, because I'm notorious for leaving things and like things catching on fire or like, but for anyone who watches my story knows that there has been more than a few mishaps during the production of these stupid Instagram stories. I almost burned my parents' house down making steak au poivre.
What?
Turns out brandy can spontaneously combust.
Especially if you're holding a phone.
Yeah. Yeah. So I poured the cup of brandy in and it exploded and lit my parents' hood on fire. And
oh my gosh.
Yeah, that was crazy. And I lit a towel on fire when I wasn't paying attention, grabbing a pan to put it in the oven. The towel hit the edge of the gas burner, caught on fire instantly. So maybe not the best idea, but
don't cook with Brian.
Yeah. Yeah. Just let me do the cooking.
Just watch his stories.
Yeah.
Learn and then
Yeah.
Fair.
I'm also a huge control freak in the kitchen. I don't like people touching my ish.
But that's a like technical component too, eh?
Yeah. Yeah, I'm in the same way that I get obsessed with making sure that the art part of the photo is done, but also the technical stuff. I focus a lot on when I'm cooking. It's like, oh, is this, you know, is this the right technique for this job? Am I like, when I'm dicing this onion, there's everything properly cut to the right dimensions, and yeah, in a way that I don't think I focus on other things in my life with that much detail or attention. Yeah.
That's fair. All right. So my last question for you, I guess I have one last question and then I'll give you the floor after that. But if you had a meal that kind of like represented you as a person, what would it be?
Well, I was talking to my friends about this, and we were talking about how well, one, how morbid the idea of a last meal is.
True.
But also the fact that I would definitely pick chicken and waffles as a last meal. Yeah, well, going back to the sweet and savory thing, you know, balance. Chicken and waffles is the king or queen of, yeah, it's just a really interesting combination to me. I don't understand how someone will put breakfast foods and dinner foods together, and I've always found it hilarious that someone was just like, oh, chicken and waffles, natural. And I've been obsessed with it since I was a little kid. Like, I remember getting it for brunch and just being like, this is the best thing I've ever put in my mouth. This is amazing. And so, yeah, if there's chicken and waffles at a restaurant, I'm getting it. It doesn't even, like, it's, you know, people have that thing. If there's, like, you know, when there's a picky kid, they go for the cheese pizza everywhere.
Yeah.
I'm the guy with the chicken and waffles. So I've had a pretty good survey.
So
for whatever reason, I think that would represent me. Or,
that's fair.
Yeah, I'm going to pick that.
Or Hawaiian pizza.
Yeah.
He's
and
that
I know
guy.
I'm going to catch some flack for that.
Yeah.
People are talking shit lately on social media about Hawaiian pizza, but yeah, it's great.
It'll make a comeback, I'm sure.
Yeah.
There'll be a day.
Yeah. The irony is there.
So best chicken and waffles in Toronto.
Oh, man. Parts and Labor.
Yeah.
Or The Good Son on Queen. Both on Queen. Both in hipster heaven of West Queen West.
Yep.
Both very great. Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah. Those places are very, very good, and they make a very good chicken and waffles.
Cool.
Yeah.
All right. Well, to thank you for your time with us, I want to give you the floor. So if you have anything that you want to promote.
You should check out my band, Roach Lord.
Woo.
Sarah's partner and is also in the band with me. We play Screamo.
I wouldn't call it Screamo.
Yeah. Punk.
What's the Facebook description?
We call it The Sound of Your Parents Fighting, which I think is
accurate.
No, I'm sorry. I really am sorry. I have to do this. I'm going to quickly plug new Roach Lord EP. It's coming out Friday, September 28th, called Max May. If you're a fan of generic pop punk, post-hardcore, and you grew up going to Warped Tour, you're going to absolutely love it. Check it out. And God bless nepotism.
Other than that, my photography, you can find me at brianrankin.ca. Or if you want to follow my food stories on Instagram,
yes.
It's at Brian Rankin.
I'll link to that in the episode notes too.
Yeah.
So
cool.
Everyone can see your stories.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Come join the party.
Yeah.
It'll be fun.
Watch him set things on fire.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
That was an interview with Brian Rankin, photographer extraordinaire. His band page for Roach Lord and his photography website can be found in our show notes below. Thank you for tuning in to Anthro Dish. See you next time.